On this episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, we get into game development over the decades. We talk about motivating teams, dealing with investors, and how to adapt to the ups and downs of business. I know you're going to get a lot out of this, so make sure to grab your pen and paper and sit down. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Go back to the shadow. You shall not fail! Crowdfunding Nerds.
Amazing.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen, and I am joined, as always, by Sean and not Rick. Once again, in Rick's place, we have Chris Skaggs of Soma Games. He is a video game developer with lots and lots of years of experience in this industry. And, I've had the pleasure of chatting with him on a number of occasions, and he is just a wealth of knowledge. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. So it being kind of in this context where we can kind of trade ideas, I think it's going to be a gas.
Yes, yes. And so the topic at hand is really just related to your experiences through your years of game development. And really, I mean, you've been, at every level, you've had to find publishers for projects. You've worked on projects for others. You have, you've done your own projects, within your own company and launched them. And so I'm really excited to just try to pull some wisdom from you, because at the end of the day, you're a successful business owner, or rather you're part of a very successful business, and we want to have successful businesses too. So what
Fair
can
enough.
you teach us, Tell us your secrets. We're the Padawan and you're the master. So let's get into it. So first of all, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, about Soma Games, and the types of pies you have your fingers in.
Yeah. I would say one thing that if you want to understand me, just personally, I've always been an entrepreneur, and it was always something. I remember, literally, I'm the kind of guy who have a lemonade stand on the corner or whatever. I remember being in high school, and all of the sports clubs would sell candy as a fundraiser. And one day I was like, well, I should just be able to do that. So I started buying candy at, Sam's Club and marking it up. And that's just always been my thing.
You're one of those guys that abused the auction house in World of Warcraft and made cotton really expensive, weren't you?
That is exactly the case. But I would say,
carry on.
One of the things about that is it means for me that I'm always kind of looking for what's gonna stick. I'm very adaptable, and we pivot all the time. And so I think one of the things that you have to understand about Soma is our longevity, which has been a while. So we've been at this really since 2005 on paper, and 2008 in actual code, and then before that was just sort of the predecessor of Soma Games was a web development group where we were kind of tinkering with the technology. So it was what's one of the things that we've gone around is we've been available for whatever happened. So the iPhone, as an example, was an event. It was a precipitating event that probably no one could have anticipated. But all of a sudden, instead of making a $5 million game for back in the day, the Xbox, now you could make a game for the iPhone for $10 grand. And you had to be flexible enough to see that and realize this is an opportunity, even though all the kinds of the numbers aren't equatable on either side. Neither the risk nor the reward were equal. But if you could see, but here's a way to survive another day. Right? Sometimes that's all you're doing is how do we survive a little bit longer so that something else can happen? And probably there's a lot to be said for that whole, and you've heard this in probably every business book you've ever said. It's persistence. Can you just hang on there like a cockroach? Just, not let the world kill you. And you'd be surprised how longevity actually goes. It speaks to people in a way that kind of not many other things do. If you're the new guy in town, that's one thing. If you've been around for 20 years, people just look at you differently. They give you different opportunities, even if you don't deserve it, right? Because the truth is, you said, and you're very kind to say so, Andrew, we're a successful business, quote unquote. But sometimes all you need is just to be an existing business, right?
That's the goal, to stay existing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long and hard road being a business owner, but it's so rewarding. I would joke with people and say, look, I'm a business owner and I have earned the right to work half days. And whichever 12 hours of the day I want to work is totally up to me.
Exactly. Well played.
So, Chris, does the name have anything to do with the Brave New World and Huxley's idea of Soma?
So, okay, we're going deep now. I know you probably didn't think it was deep. So here's the thing.
Sean's
and you
deep. I'm very shallow.
You can read this on our website, but the truth is, for me, the reason that Soma Games exists is, like, the best way to understand is I had a supernatural experience. And part of that weird season in my life, which happened kind of all on one weird weekend, was this name. This name, Soma Games, was sort of like deposited, downloaded in my head. And it didn't mean anything in particular to me. And it's, frankly, now, as time has gone by, it's a weird word. It means a lot of things. It exists in a lot of languages. And so yes, Brave New World is part of it. It's probably one of the funnier things, but I can't take credit for that. Like, it wasn't like Chris thought that'd be a fun name. Like, for me, it felt like this was just the right name. And funny little bit of the story is somagames.com had been bought by someone, I don't even know how long, years before I ever wanted it, and had just become available like a week before I suddenly went searching. Hey, I wonder if that domain is available. And it had just become available from someone else. And so it's just an interesting little bit of the story. So in history, like, now I'm looking back on all these years later, I think what God was trying to get at was actually the Greek word soma, which is used in the New Testament to refer to, like, all of the people, right? Like, sort of the body of Christ. So soma means body in Greek. And Paul uses it to refer to, like, the church, right? Like all of the combined body of Christ, so to speak. And so much of what Soma Games has become kind of a collection point. Like, a lot of people kind of collect around Soma to meet each other. You know, that's our Imladris conference. And this has just seemed to be almost an accidental aspect of what we're doing. But I think it may be one of the most important parts that we didn't do on purpose.
It's interesting. I think that the analogy of the body even applies to business.
Lamp.
I've been looking at cybernetics, reading a book at the moment by Norbert Wiener, and they use these illustrations of the human body where there's all these mechanisms the body has that automatically control your body temperature, blink. And so the idea of cybernetics is to kind of get these automated systems in a business somewhere that can sort of automatically correct itself by engineering it. And kind of thinking of this in terms of business, this idea of a body where everyone has a different role and purpose in the organization. They all have different strengths, but they work collectively to fulfill certain goals. It's a very interesting concept that obviously you see in the New Testament, but I think it applies to businesses as well. And I think when it comes to building a team, which I know we're going to get into at some stage, building a team, it's really important that you find people who complement your strengths.
Yes.
Complement your weaknesses, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Yeah. That you can really work together and achieve so much more.
Yep. When I would hire people, it's because I hate doing a particular thing, or I can't do a particular thing enough, and it's required to grow, and when I hired my very first employee, it was because it was in 2014, and it was because I couldn't, I didn't like doing website design, and I was making enough from website designs that I just needed. It was either that's all I was going to do, or I would find somebody that liked doing website designs. I like talking to people and that kind of thing. And that type of that move, it was a really, really scary move because I'd never hired anybody before, and I'd never been responsible for someone else's paycheck. And it was the best move ever because it allowed me to do more with less time. I didn't require as much time to, it was an incredible realization.
And I think for me, part of as time has gone by is I have come to really, really love the opportunities to see someone, especially like a new person, right? So we'll get a person out of college or something who they're so enthusiastic and they love kind of the idea of games, and they might be an artist or a musician or a coder, but then to be in a position to help them grow and learn and develop, it's actually one of the best things that I get to do. And so, for lack of a better word, I guess you'd say an employer, but maybe at best you can sometimes be a mentor or a trainer or something like that. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then also, the way that I find is, I, for example, Sean, like I trained Sean as, as best I could. And then I had to say, all right, like you've got to work on some of the stuff yourself. And he probably has, I mean, we did this podcast episode of like Sean's lessons learned in marketing after like 3 months of working here, but now it's been over 3 years, right? About 3 years, I think. Anyway, but it's
And what a waste of time, right? I mean, he's just so stubborn.
well, now Sean will teach me things, and it's just it's really cool, he absolutely is more of an expert than I am in some areas, and it's just really great to not only have that Sean doing things well, but also Sean doing things better and sharing with me what's working, and so that's really been really cool to see.
Right on.
Oh, shucks.
Don't get a big head. Don't get a big head about it.
No. Yeah, you suck too.
That's a backhanded compliment. So, when, I guess since we're on the subject of having other people work for you, a lot of people listening to this podcast are board game designers. They will often work with contract people, or, they're publishers. So they have maybe not a lot of recurring revenue coming in, but they'll have a big splash of revenue come in when they launch a successful Kickstarter or, other GameFound campaign or whatever. When you sort of made the transition to work with like employees versus contractors, and I'm sure you still do work with contractors.
Yes.
Did you have stable recurring revenue? Like what type of, like, why would you hire an employee versus work with a contractor, if that makes sense?
Probably it really depends on the length of the project you imagine. And so stable recurring revenue, I think for Soma has always been a little bit of a wish list. For one thing, like we've had sometimes seasons that in hindsight, you're like, that was stable enough for, a couple years at a time or whatever. I remember we had some really good contracts for several years with Intel, for example. And on the one hand, like it felt stable enough, but also I don't know, maybe this is just personality. You're always afraid that it's never going to last. And so I think one of them is if you have the cash up front. So like you said, you get your game funded or whatever it is up front, then it's really probably smart to plan through what that's going to be. And so I think what contractors can do is we usually use contractors in places where I need something very particular that has to be especially high in either quality or efficiency or something like that. So you would need an expert, and a contractor at best in that regard. You're looking for their product more than anything else, and that might be an illustration or a song or whatever else. But I think the preference is for me, like the community that builds around a project. So if you're more than like a couple of months in a project, and especially if you're into a couple of years for a project, the community and the momentum, ultimately that builds only through people who are sticking around long enough to establish relationships and efficiencies. And so I think then those longer term, and there's one, you could talk about this sort of contractually, and you could talk about it from a tax perspective. But employees, I will be honest, as a business owner, I know people imagine that an employee is, quote, more stable, more safe. I think that's an illusion. People get laid off. I don't know when this podcast will get aired, but we're looking at thousands and thousands of layoffs in the game industry just in the last month or two. Like it's been a bloodbath.
Yep.
And these are employees. Like these aren't contractors. These are employees. So I think it's a myth to think that an employee job is safer. But more to the point, I do think it represents sort of a commitment from the employer, and often it comes with benefits, and it's what is health insurance, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But if your goal is actually to provide benefits, I would say like you could do that often without the tax structure. And so to me, really, the question is about can you create the community? Can you create the personal relationships? Because those build sort of an intangible value to the project that is especially worth investing in if you have the cash up front and you can plan for it. That would be my thought.
Yeah, that's curious. I always looked at contractors for me. I think that, according to the IRS, really, I guess the definition of a contractor, someone who works obviously within the country, they don't actually care how I pay Sean. They're just like, you know, they're not going to make any tax money off of it, so they don't care. But the difference between an employee and a contractor is generally an employee is somebody who has a rigid schedule with deadlines that you have agency over when when a project needs to be completed. You tell them, I need you to complete this by Friday or whatever. But the contractor is more of, or a 1099 is more of somebody who has autonomy over their schedule and what they, what order they tackle things in and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but okay, I
Right.
don't know about you, but that is the IRS thing. I think it's completely bananas, and it's not at all like that does not represent the way people work today. No, and I don't
Right.
just mean in gaming; I mean at all. Like that is
Yeah.
so out of date. I don't know. That's my
That's
opinion. What do you think?
that's definitely, I mean, IRS is out of date. I will say, like, the government is out of date.
By decades.
Yeah. Sean is we have this thing going on where I don't want to talk too much about it. So I'm vague booking here, but we had to like advertise in a magazine as, and like newspapers for what it is that we're doing. And I learned, like I said, I don't want to talk too much about it, but it was like a government requirement in order to do this thing that we had to advertise in newspapers. It's like, nope. Does anybody
Really?
read and circle like job offers
Nobody
in
cares.
newspapers, whatever? And yeah, it was just funny, but it's, the government's like, yeah, you got to do that. And, so I think that anything that the government does is kind of outdated, but really what it comes down to for me is working with the right people, somebody who feels entitled to, like, what can you give me, employer? That has to be balanced against how can I help, and
Yeah.
I think, my job as an employer, and I'm a small business, so it's a lot easier of me to think of employees and think about how can I make their lives easier so that they can give me their very best. I want, from selfishly, I want my employees to give me their very best. And so what I think about is like, what things do these people need to be able to do that? And sometimes, I mean, they need vacations. Sometimes they need days off. Sometimes they need,
Yeah.
a bunch of things. But I find the employee is somebody who I can, yes, you, like you mentioned earlier, is somebody who commits to you, but I'm committed to them as well. And that's something that is much different than a contractor is. Contractor for me is somebody like, we contracted out for our map tiles for Deliverance. We're making another, like, at the moment, 12 additional map tiles for use in our expansion. And I contracted to the same artist that did our previous 21 tile or 22 tiles. And he, for the base game. And he was really happy to receive the work again and was excited to work for us and all of that. But when those tiles are done, we're done with him. So until, a couple years down the road, and we've got another one, whereas like the employee is somebody that it's like, okay, we have 40 hours in a week roughly that we can work. And how can we make the very best of that time? Because I know my employee needs all 40 of those hours in order to, provide for their household and that kind of thing, right? Worth of wages. So, how can we make the
Yeah.
best of it?
And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I probably look at one thing a little bit differently, though, is the commitment. Like this is where, as I think, as a business owner, it's a balance between, are you committing to a project and what's best for the project? Are you committing to the people? And and for
Mm-hmm.
Soma, like if I have my druthers, I'm always looking for people, and this would be like to the employee side, if they're kind of that Swiss Army knife person who can do it, who just by virtue of their character can kind of do anything. then those are people who will always be valuable at something. And so today it might be that I need an illustration. Tomorrow it might be that someone's got to handle the Discord channel. Tomorrow it might be like, hey, can someone do this research? And when they have that attitude of, you know, I may have a particular skill that I'm good at, or even one that I came in under this job. So whatever, I'm a writer, I'm an illustrator, I'm an animator, you pick it. But then also they just have
Mhm.
that kind of character and spirit that says, but I'm also here to help. That is always
Yeah.
probably the big thing for me is when and to be candid, like willingness is one thing, but competence is another. But when you find that, man, you keep those people, and you sow into them, and you know that the value proposition for both personal life and business life will be way outside whatever you end up paying them, just because they're that kind of person.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's different than folks who I think you could be really, really, really good at one particular thing, but maybe not something else. I remember a guy came in once, who was looking for a job. He was a 3D modeler, and at the time we were working on a Minecraft representation of Redwall Abbey. And so, because this is like really back in the early days when we were making Abbey Craft, and he was someone who probably had good enough skills, but he was totally unwilling to do anything other than what he had trained for. He was totally unwilling to get into Minecraft, sort of as a like a learning experience. Like that wasn't a platform he knew, and so he just
Mhm.
wasn't really willing to do it. And he was really kind of belligerent about the whole thing. It's like, yeah, that's not in my job description, and I'm like, you don't have a
That's
job
actually the thing I
description.
was thinking about. The phrase that's not my job description. That's something that I always have a hard time with, just as a business owner. Now, for people that are working for others, they might think, well, these business owners, they're all the same or whatever. Well, when you run a small business, it's a little different. Everybody kind of has to wear a lot of hats,
Yeah,
because we're not mega corporations. I have six, staff members, and if I had 600, then we would have a department for this, a department for that, and saying this is not in my job description, it makes sense because you're not getting paid extra for the, I don't know, like if you are a full-time 3D modeler and they ask you to manage their social media, that would be something that's kind of outside the scope of work that would add a lot of stress. If
yeah,
you already
yeah.
have 40 hours of work of stuff to do, then I could see that that's like a reasonable thing to say. But when we're a small team, like one of the hallmarks of a small team is that you have to wear multiple hats.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting thing, difficult to, I guess, to pin down and say this is like one size fits all. But I do agree that I call them unicorns. You use the term Swiss Army knife. People that are willing to do lots of things, or that are capable of doing more than one thing.
Yeah.
I find that those people, they are. I'm just like, you're able to invest into them because they're interested in investing into you, and so yeah, I find that rigidness is very unattractive to me as the manager of a business.
It's an interesting thing. I think on the one hand, there is a cultural moment, which was there is a there is a desire, which I think is a good one, for young people to come up through school, and they have been convinced of their own intrinsic value, and they sort of insist on it, like, hey, I'm a person, I'm valuable, I'm more than just the job I do. That is absolutely true, and I think that that's great. But there often is not the thing that says, and I want to be part of a team, and that's so the notion of like, we're going to work together and we're going to solve this, and we're going to we're going to make the product good, or we're going to make the company good. There often isn't that, and so it becomes sort of one sided. Um, and and I don't think that's unovercomable, but it's kind of a philosophy in some people that I don't know that it should be my job to overcome your philosophy. Like, you like
Yeah.
somewhere in here, I'm like, yeah, that's just not a culture match for us. And even if you're really good, it becomes so challenging to kind of just get jobs done. It's like I can't spend my time and energy fighting with your philosophy about work life balance, right? And it's
Yeah.
I get it. Maybe you're just not a small business kind of a person. Okay, like then let's just let's just go there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember
What
reading
do
a
you
book
think
by
about it,
Dave
Sean?
Ramsey. Well, I remember reading a book by Dave Ramsey, and he says that eventually your business will have to get to a stage where you will do the things in your business that only you can do. So you might really enjoy making videos, but there might be someone else in your team that can make videos, but you're the only one who can do the accounting or the taxes or something. So you kind of have to
Right.
kind of adapt your position in the business to eventually do the things that only you like to do. I quite enjoy creating videos. I've got a degree in visual effects,
Right on.
but my current job, I don't do much of that, which is fine. But there are times, and we're creating a YouTube channel at the moment where I get to kind of do some of that. That's fun. But it's just an example of like trying to fit yourself into a position, into a business where you're needed, and what needs to be done, and what keeps the lights on.
Yeah. And from my part, I think you have that. Not only do you have that ability, but you have that desire. So I think, how can I free up some regular hours a week to try to enable Sean to do that. One of the businesses that I really love, as far as this particular practice, is Google. And it's been a little while since I've looked at them, but they have this thing that they do where it's like 20% of an employee's time can be dedicated to their own projects. That's how I want to say that's how Gmail came about. That's how a lot of Google Drive, a lot of other projects that Google is now very core known for. The Google logo on the search page doing funny things. People make little games that like, I don't know, on Valentine's Day you can play with the logo, and on the Google search bar. There are a lot of other things that they do that I think make
Type in ZergRush.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So or
Yeah,
Thanos,
okay.
what is it? The Infinity
However,
Gauntlet.
inside Google, though, what they'll all tell you is like, that's kind of a lie. Like, technically, that's the case, but it's not that you get to use 80% of your time for Google stuff and 20% of your time for your stuff. What it is you use 100% of your time for Google stuff. And if you want to do the extra stuff, they'll let you do it. And so it's an interesting thing to talk about. What does it look like on paper, and what does it look like inside Google? Because what I've heard from many people is that in practice, it's actually an extra burden, not a freedom. So it's an interesting thing to see how sometimes we can talk about things like programs, initiative, thoughts that sound very empowering, that sound really, really like free. But in the end, like, the work's got to get done. And I think that's one where that Google, like, Free Monday or whatever they call it, is a really good example of, it's not what you think it is. But boy, it looks great on paper, right? And I want to tell all my investors about how cool this is.
That's interesting. Now were you going to talk about Valve? Because I'm
I was
interested.
I was just going to say, on your website, you talk about an unforgettable field trip to Valve. And the reason that I was thinking of this, because you were talking about this kind of the different structures within companies. What was that field trip like? Did it influence how you set up your company at all? Because for those of you listening, Valve has a very peculiar setup, to say the least, where everyone can sort of just work on whatever they kind of think is going to be, I suppose, the most fruitful, and then people kind of form internal teams. Was that something that you saw when you went there, or what was your experiences around that?
We did see it, and so that was, I don't mind saying, like, that was a really fun time, and it was inspiring and exciting. Valve is an interesting moment too. So I want to be clear, I'm not trying to sass Valve, but it is another example of, okay, how do you measure this thing where, one, Valve has all the money in the world, they don't need to do anything, right? And so, like, probably they could pay that entire
the
staff.
Steam store, really. That's
yeah. And they could pay their whole staff probably for 50 years literally to do nothing. And so they have a luxury that almost nobody has. Also, however, they produce very little in terms of, like, what, some hits like Portal, big deal. Half-Life, big deal. Alex, super cool. But for the number of years they've been around, or the number of people, you got to ask, like, but what else is happening here? And so from a productivity perspective, I think from the outside looking in, I wonder, somewhere here, someone's got to make a decision. And so, to be candid, I don't want to say I'm critical of Valve, but I feel like when I look at that story again, it sounds great for about 20 minutes until, as a business owner, like, but wait a second, what's really going on here? And so I think the low output from Valve has to tell us something that and maybe you're back to square, like, but what are you measuring? right? And so if you're measuring human happiness, I'll bet you all the people there have a good time. But if you're measuring like productivity, I don't I don't know. I don't think that they've done much.
I think they've been very clever with using their products to market things. So Steam really became popular because of Half-Life 2. You couldn't install Half-Life 2 unless you created a Steam account. So that's how they got everyone on Steam. And then from there, they just built their entire system. So, and it's the same with Alex, right? They produce Alex, but then they also release their headset. So it's like, oh, buy our headset and you can play our new Half-Life game. So they almost use their games as a means to kind of promote their other projects
Something
or kind
else,
of
yeah.
adjacent projects, which I think is a really clever way of doing marketing. It's using the game itself to promote something else.
In a similar manner, Blizzard did that with Battle.net, right?
So
I don't remember if I had to do Battle.net, but certainly I'm sure it built it.
Yeah, I mean nowadays you've got I forget, did Microsoft bought Blizzard, right, from Activision? Or no, Microsoft owns Activision Blizzard now, right?
Yeah.
Because they own Activision too. So anyway, the concept behind Battle.net was it was this matchmaking system, but now when Blizzard comes up with a new game, you know about it because you have a Battle.net account, whether you play World of Warcraft or you play StarCraft or, you know, Overwatch or Hearthstone or whatever, you know about the new thing, or Diablo. And they incentivize you to kind of jump into Diablo when a new Diablo game comes out or an expansion because you get a freebie or maybe a StarCraft themed freebie or whatever. So I think that's really clever, but it's interesting, you know, thinking about and maybe like transitioning back to the way that you guys operate internally with your own products. What are you building toward now, and what, you know, if anything that you've done in the past kind of inspired you to adapt your business to go that way? Very open-ended question, but I'm interested to hear.
So I think in big strokes, Soma has gone through a couple of phases. And so, you know, at least kind of in the early phase, it was you're just taking any job that anybody has. And we did a bunch of work for hire. And that's when, for example, like when we were working with Intel, you just kind of took whatever came down the road. The downside of that is you never own anything that you do. So it's always just, you know, one gig to the next gig to the next gig. Probably the next big phase for us was the Redwall phase, where this incredible IP totally landed in our laps. It just out of nowhere. Like I can take basically zero responsibility for that. Like it just happened. But then, you know, using that, we found investors and, you know, they paid for content. And now you're in that, and, you know, just, you know, as we're talking here, we just launched kind of another big push for that on Steam and Xbox and PlayStation. And so now you're trying to sell the product, which is cool, right? But here the kind of the thing is, but all sales are offset, one against investors, two against royalties. And so which is cool, right? That's a great way to make a business. But I'll tell you where I am right now, like what I hope for our next phase in Soma is I'm increasingly a fan of smaller format, like playing Moneyball with game development. And what I want to do is I want to lean into models that create smaller content for smaller cost, and that you can create kind of a more recurring revenue on a platform. So for us, one of the Redwall games that we made was interactive fiction. It's called The Lost Legends of Redwall, and we had all these stories, and it's like your typical interactive fiction, right? You make choices, and there's characters and art. We found that dollar for dollar, that game performed better than any of the other games in terms of like revenue compared to cost. And the strongest value that we got out of it really was through writing, which comparatively is very inexpensive to say like 3D World or something like that. And so I'm actually really excited about interactive fiction as a platform. There's so much good IP out there. Making a good interactive fiction game is comparatively very inexpensive, and it maps to every demographic you can think of. So what I hope to do for us is to create a platform around this one genre of games. I think it's something that plays to our strengths. And then, Lord willing, what that will do is that will create that kind of, you know, maybe it's like Valve. If we can just create that recurring source of revenue that makes the machine go, then you've got a lot more time and energy for the passion projects, for the things that you love. Um, and so for us, the Redwall game right now led to another one where we're doing um, our own IP. So this is a story that we wrote, which is like Blade Runner meets Supernatural and Noah's Ark in space, right? So and of course you guys know this project because you're helping us build an audience and get that thing marketed. And so what I'd love to do is, one season becomes 10 seasons and one IP becomes 5 IPs. Like I really love that, and that's my next stage, I hope. And frankly, in hindsight, after doing this for many, many years, we did not think about the business of our business very much, and not enough. So when I think about marketing, when I think about building an audience, it's just sort of the nature, I think, of most artists that you're passionate about the thing you're making, and you kind of wish that marketing wasn't part of the like. I just don't want to think about that. I just want to do this thing I'm excited about. Um, and in hindsight, that may just be the notion of uh, of artists in general. Like the fact that you have a stereotype of the starving artist speaks a lot to people who will totally give their lives to their passion project, um, and they will kind of kill themselves doing it. Um, and yet, someone in there needs to work on the business side of gaming so that those people can make great art. I think about
Mhm.
creative people in general; they mature over time, both their creativity itself, but also their audience, their fans, and their style. Like all that builds over time, which means it doesn't scale like tech or like fintech or something. It doesn't scale the way that venture scales. So you got to find a funding mechanism that leans into the long term, not just in the quick 2 year I'm in, I'm out. And so this is something I really care about more and more these years.
So, Chris, it sounds like you've had a lot of experience with attracting investors or finding investors. I know in your website and your store, you've got a sort of a humorous section where you talk about some kind of crazy investor who starts talking about the Antichrist.
Oh
So,
yeah.
if you could maybe give our listeners a bit of context, but also any tips on securing investors, what to do, what not to do, any kind of direction would be helpful.
Yeah. So probably one of the first things. So I'll tell you that story, what that was about. We met a fella who, this was early on in Redwall Games, who understood the value of the IP, and he wanted to put some money into the product, and we needed a publisher. So it's like, great, like you have money, we have a product, let's do this together. And all the conversations were really positive and good and exciting, and we're like, okay, this is going to be a good bit. And then at one point, almost accidentally, I happened to be down in San Francisco for another reason, and that was where he was from. And I'm like, hey, before we sign anything, let's just get together for lunch. And what wound up happening was this really weird thing where he comes in and sits down, and almost without even kind of like stopping to say hello, he just sits down and kind of just starts going off on every conspiracy theory that you can ever think of. Like, you name it, he had just these things to say. He had all of this. He had all of his stories about how he was connected to. I don't even remember. Like, there was this Taiwanese king guy whose name was like a DJ name. It was like NC-17, Bobop, and he was like the Merovingian leader, and he just went off. I had a friend with me who, it was one of those stories, like if there wasn't someone there to witness it, you wouldn't believe it. But we're just watching this guy go on and on and on, and I'm not saying anything, and because you're like, what is happening? And at some point, my friend Ryan, he's like, do you understand that we're Christians? And the guy's like, oh yeah, I know that. And he just keeps talking and talking and talking, and all of his weird black helicopter stuff. And then Ryan's like, do you know that you just described the Antichrist, like according to like the Bible? And the guy's like, really? That's so cool. He just keeps going on. It was the weirdest situation. And I don't know, it must have been 45 minutes that the guy just goes off. And at some point he sort of stops and looks at you, and kind of like he realized, oh no, I let my inner voice out, right?
He said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, time to go.
Yeah. So you
And
did. Yeah. Go ahead.
we never worked with him, but I think that become a real lesson is, and you've probably heard this before, like partnerships, and that would include like a publisher, they're like a marriage, which means that they're really hard to get out of, and like to divorce, no matter what, is problematic and painful and everything else. So choose your partners really, really wisely, and not all money is the same. So like this guy's money was green, like he still had it, but as a partner, it would have been a mess. Oh my gosh, and we would never have been a good match for that. And so I would say like you got to make sure that you are investigating the people, not just
Mm.
the details, or you
Right.
will find yourself in a really dark space.
Yeah.
I think in the same way, creatives probably don't think enough about the kinds of things um, that investors want, and so they sort of answer questions that are meaningful to the creative, but maybe not so much to the investor. And so your pitch deck
Yep.
needs to include those kind of things about about revenue, about progress, about plans. Like you got to have numbers in there, you got to have projections,
Mhm.
and so like you can't avoid that. On the other hand, let me complain about something where I think investors, however, they are way too quick to think money is the king of the situation. And
Yeah.
they will almost always find a really clever, sharp, innovative founder. And then the first thing they're like is, I'm willing to give you money if you can now, like clever technologist person, become something that you're not, which is to say,
Yeah.
like, go be a CPA. Go tell me all the tax advantages in Germany. Like, I think that often on, especially like investors who think that that's the golden rule, and I get how they get there, but they're not trying often then to make something good in the world. They're just trying to make a buck, which is their
Right.
prerogative, but it creates again like an unbalanced relationship. And I think those are the
Yep.
poor ones. And so for creatives, we have to be willing to say like, that's not the relationship that I want,
Yep.
which is super hard when you need the money.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I actually had a personal experience in relation to investment. So I went on to a popular podcast that's it's taken a different form now called it's the Babylon Bee podcast. And somebody that listened in, I talked about Deliverance, our board game right before. I want to say like on day 2 of funding the game, I recorded the podcast. So we had made about $150,000 at this point in like one day, and then I record the podcast and it's out like a few days later. I want to say I recorded it on Wednesday and it was out on either Thursday or like the following Tuesday. And so about 35,000 listeners, and it was really, really helpful to our campaign and everything. And there was one guy that listened, and I connected with him, and he ended up contacting me after the Kickstarter was over, through the Babylon Bee staff. They were like, "Hey, this guy wants to talk to you. You want to talk to him?" And he said he wants to invest into your company, because he likes what you're doing. And so I connected with him and we talked, and it was really cool. Like he was like, "Yeah, this is a really fantastic thing. You're making some serious inroads in a new way in the board game industry, and I want to be a part of it. How can we take this game from selling 5,000 units to selling 100,000 units every year?" I'm like, "Wow, that's like, I like to hear that. Like that's the conversation I like." This guy has, he's kind of has some experience. Like he's built and sold companies for lots of money, and now he has several companies for lots of money, and now he's got the ability to invest, and he sees potential in me, and he wants to make a big splash in the game space. So I thought that was really great, and we talked, and he gave our company, the Deliverance company, like Lowen Games LLC, he gave us a $1.6 million valuation. And I'm like, "Hey, I need to control the company. So I need 51% of the company at least in order to be the primary decision maker." Like I didn't trust people enough to give them majority. And, I'm the one that decides how we move forward. Like that's my main requirement. So we talked about, taking a $400,000 investment for 25% of the company. And that sounded really, really good to me. I'm like, man, what I could do with $400,000 for this company, I could grow it. I could bring on the staff to help me like light speed increase the production of Deliverance. And these other ideas that I have, like we could actually have runway to go for it. And he's like, yeah, I want to get this deal done in like a month. I'm serious, and let's do this. I was like, okay, let me pray about it, and it's like, all right, let's do it. And the conversation kind of slowed down a little bit. It was Christmas time, and conversation slowed down. And then I was like trying to reach out to him, and he was being he wouldn't pick up my phone calls, and of course his voicemail box wasn't set up, so I couldn't just leave messages or whatever. I could text him, but eventually I got a hold of him and was like, hey, this, are we still doing this? He's like, yeah, we'll do it. I just need a payback on the investment. It's like, wait a second. Okay, so the $400,000 is not an investment into the company anymore. It's actually a loan that needs to get paid back. And the interest rate is going to be tied to a common number in investment, which is called SOFI. It was like 9% interest at the time. And it would only be charged on the section of the loan that I pulled out. So if I pulled $50,000 out and was using it for stuff, then I would get charged 9% interest on that 50,000. And I thought, like, I'm at the moment, if I make 5,000 games, I will not be able to pay this back. Like, I'll need to make 15,000 games, and the loan will only be paid back if I sell all of them. And this is like a significant investment on my side. Like, it's a really scary thing. Like, this could cause my company and the idea of Deliverance to just kind of sink if I don't do this right. And by taking this money, like, I hope that he's going to be super involved, but it sounds like the money is like the main thing that I'm getting out of this. And that instead of believing in this idea, this investor, he doesn't believe in the idea, but he sees he can profit from it and is willing to, give me, he's willing to sink the Deliverance project. In the end, it's like, what's more important, the person or the money? And I think the money is more important to this person. So, it has to be probably for an investor. And so if I take this money, I might as well close up shop in 3 years, unless we hit like some really, really big numbers. And, we might have been able to do it. Deliverance, we were making sales for like $20 in ad spend for about $140 in revenue, like per sale. So I think we could have done it, but man, like, to have another 10,000 games and have to do that with 10,000 more games is kind of a scary thing when you're getting charged interest and all of that. So anyway, the whole thing, I felt in the end, by taking that person's money, I would have been taking it would have been a dangerous deal. And I thought the result, I guess the counterpoint, if I don't take the money, then I will have to build this company slow, and I'll have to build it slower. I won't be able to, buy 15,000 games and whatever. I'll have to, run another Kickstarter and prove that Deliverance needs to exist because there's a market for it. And, that kind of thing, which is actually, I think, a really good thing. Instead of, taking money to accelerate it and whatnot, like, I can do this on my own. So why would I even take money if I can do this on my own?
Right.
I would lose a ton off of the IP. Someone else would profit from the IP just because they gave me a little money. In the end, I think I would make it to the finish line in both cases, maybe a little faster if I got infused with money, but maybe I would fall on my face and the project would crash and burn if I went that route. But I know if I went the other route of just taking the money, using it wisely, and investing into the next Deliverance campaign, and then, hopefully my big, hairy, audacious goal is to raise $1 million on that Kickstarter, then I would feel like an idiot for taking money. So I don't know what your thoughts are, but it just seemed like a terrible idea for me to take that money in the end. And I turned it down.
Yeah, I think that's a good play. And like anything, like
I think feel good at the time. But
you're like, ooh, that's a key. I think that you always have to be, on the one hand, some people are opportunistic, and that's not all bad. Like, I want to be clear, like, I'm not throwing shade. Like it's okay to like have money and want to accelerate your money and multiply it. Like, great, that's super awesome. It's more on the people who say one thing and mean another.
Yeah.
So I have trouble with people who say like, I want to make a difference in culture, right? And so I want to invest in
Mhm.
the arts or whatever else, but then they don't ever do anything, right? So they don't want to change culture. They want to make money, and
Mhm.
which is fine, but just be
And buy a
honest.
bigger house.
Yeah, so just be honest. And so sometimes I think that the trick is framing the conversation up front. It's like let's just be really clear, like because it's this idea of like long term permanent capital, and sometimes what I want to go to an investor or for that matter a donor, you got to sell the right thing. And so for example, one of the notions might be we are trying to build a studio which we think will like kind of help create multiple products over decades. And so, like, if you were that person who's like, I want to shape culture through Hollywood, and you were back there in the 30s, in this case, the 1930s. Now I need to clarify, don't I? Like Hollywood was kind of blowing up and getting big. The smart play, if culture was your goal, would have been studios. Directors, actors. How do you really sew into the people who are going to make the difference? Instead of, for example, um, instead of projects, right? Instead of funding projects, which is where often the culture investor says that they want to do it. Like I want to invest in whatever that movie, that book, that game, and that's very product oriented, and it's all measured in dollars. Um,
Yeah.
but I think one of the things that's happened, especially, and so games for me is all about it. It rests soundly in the realm of arts entertainment. And yet that I'm going to use some language here that we use at our conference. That kingdom of arts and entertainment has way too long been a vassal kingdom to finance. And we have sold our soul, we have sold our value purely just to get stuff done because that's what motivates most creatives. They just want to see their project come to life. And who cares? I don't really care about the money. I just want to see this
We
thing
hear that a
done. And
lot,
yeah,
all the time.
and the thing is, like, on the one hand, you could say you are unwise to do that, which is probably true. But on the other hand, there's someone else taking advantage of that lack of wisdom who's like, okay, then I will take everything from you, right? I think about, and I couldn't prove this, but the story is the guy who just finished Sound of Freedom, the director, that he didn't make a single dollar because in an effort to get the thing done, he'd sold away all of his points. And at
Wow.
some point, someone's be like, okay, dude, that's just not smart. Like I'd be taking advantage of you. And
Mhm.
so I think that the notion that consent is the only important thing kind of leads to exploitation in really bad ways.
Yeah.
Now,
Also, on the other hand, you have so Legolas from The Lord of the Rings, which I think all of us on this podcast agree Lord of the Rings is awesome.
let's
Um,
just say it: Lord of the Rings is the best movie ever made. Can we
it
just say
is, and
that?
it's one movie that's split into three parts, and I'll fight you if you disagree. And Legolas made so it took was 4 or 5 years to finish that movie. Legolas, rather Orlando Bloom, the actor who played Legolas, was paid a combined total of $175,000 for
Really?
his role as Legolas. No percentages, nothing, and that was it. Which sounds like $175,000 for an actor that is split over 5 years of time. That is like you probably ate on set because you couldn't afford to go to the drive-through. Like you probably ate, maybe some of whatever Gandalf's food
Right.
that's left over. But
The
it's like,
spread.
yes, yeah, lambus bread, one little bite is all I need. So, but it actually launched his career. So, during The Hobbit, which was stretched, too much butter or too much bread and too little butter, I guess.
Right.
I
Right.
forget how the saying goes.
Butter spread over too
Um,
much toast.
yes, Legolas, he definitely made a piece of that. He made a lot of money because everybody loved Legolas, um, and so he knew his value. He was able to capitalize on his value, but he really had to invest into that. And he actually, went through interviews saying, "Yes, I'm so glad I did that." And yeah, I got raked over the coals. They saw me coming from a mile away, but that launched my career. And so I find it's difficult. But the problem is, like with artists, when he was making a movie, he was able to take part in something else. But for an artist, like for me, for Deliverance, I have this one thing, and if I give it away, I no longer have the one thing. I have to make something else up, and it might not actually, this is kind of like the way I look at it is, in a way, it's like my life song based on my expertise and my understanding of these various elements I've been able to put together. I've been able to make this thing, but I couldn't easily do that in some other industry. Like I could retheme Deliverance to, Vikings and Norse mythology or something maybe, but it just wouldn't quite have the same impact to me on the world as this product. And so if this is taken away from me because of my poor choices, my lack of vision, my lack of understanding of what those investors that want to buy bigger houses and make a good return will do to the project, or can do to the project if it doesn't make enough money, that's something that would just be really sad. And we've seen other projects that were amazing that just never saw the light of day because an investor got involved and then ended up scrapping it for parts.
Yep. That is exactly the shame. Now there's some things that I think we have not done, and by we I mean the creative people. We also have not done our work to properly denominate our work, to properly understand. Like someone as an artist should be learning the legal language. Like what kind of contract is actually fair? What kind of contract keeps? So take for example Legolas as an example. It seems to me like one of the things that would have been more fair, more equitable, was just be for every person on the project to get a percentage. And then that way, if the thing fumbles, you get nothing. But if it succeeds, you get something. And he could have had both. Like it would have, I think economically, whatever percentage is fair for a lead actor, like you can make that part of your budget. And so that I think it's a shame, for example, that the average annual wage for a SAG actor in Hollywood is like 20 grand. And so these are people who've dedicated their life to the craft and they make almost nothing. And then even and part of it's like, yeah, it's really risky. Like there's all these things that don't make any money. I can understand that. But what about the ones that do? And so you still get nothing? It just doesn't seem equitable. And then Orlando Bloom is simply selling his soul, I think, in an unfair way. And he's taken advantage of.
Yep.
There could be really easily contracts that we only pay you a percentage if it reaches a 5x multiple. I don't know, pick a number. But there's ways to do this that still make capital fair and that investors can make their money. You can do this in a way, but someone just got to think about it. And then frankly, as artists, we have to present that. Like, this is what I think is fair.
Yeah.
Take it or leave it, man. And I will say there's a moment right now with gaming where if we do this smart and we do it frankly as if you'll allow it, if like we kind of all agree as artists, like this is what we think is fair. Mm-hmm. Gaming is growing so fast. The numbers are blowing up so fast. Like we have real leverage. Mm-hmm. And we need to use that leverage with wisdom to be like, this is what we think is appropriate for this space. Yep. And so if we do that thoughtfully ahead of time, that could be a real game changer.
I will say there is, so in the board game space versus the video game space, I notice a significant difference in the number of people that are kind of banding together in the board game space and are being very transparent. Like, for example, myself, I share my numbers with everybody. I share how much Deliverance made. I share, what it costs to do various things and that kind of thing. But also there are many that share what percentage they're making from a particular contract that's signed. And I know I've never had a game signed, but I know that it's reasonable to request between 3 to 7% or to receive between 3 to 7% of either the revenue or the net. And there are different types of contracts and different ways to work it out. You might get, whatever 3% of wholesale or 7% of wholesale or 3% of revenue or other things like that. And that seems to be a lot more publicly available, and people are much more willing to publicly discuss that in board game groups, our Crowdfunding Nerds community, Board Game Design Lab community on Facebook. But I don't see that happening in video games. And maybe that's because I'm not involved in as many video game circles, but do people, like designers, tell people what kind of contracts they're getting, or is that like normal conversation?
Now that you mentioned, I don't know that it is, and so I would have a hard time finding that. I do know, for example, like I am bound by my contract with Penguin Random House. Like I can't talk about the contract.
Hmm.
And I have no idea if that's typical in gaming. I certainly know that a lot of our work with them was sort of like a book contract
Hmm.
and with the word book scratched out. Like there was some of that just went on. Like it was a whole new world for them. And so none of us really knew what to think was the right thing. So there's some
Hmm.
weird parts to our contract with them that only make sense in the context of a physical product that we can't make, but regardless. And maybe that's typical, but you're not allowed to discuss the contract. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question that I find maybe that's some of the ways for the man to hold the artist down, as
Could
he
be.
can't talk about it, right?
I do want to say,
So,
like, I think a critical component for arts and entertainment going forward really is something that you are working on, and that's the crowdfunding space. I don't think we can really go forward well without really engaging crowdfunding. And
mhm,
I mean that as an industry. I don't mean Soma. I mean everything. What crowdfunding does that, to my knowledge, really nothing else compares to is
yep,
every entertainment product really needs to find an audience, and there's no point making it if it doesn't have one.
Hmm.
And crowdfunding validates that question upfront and early and cheap.
yeah,
And, sort of like you said, like the moment somebody sees, oh, there really is a crowd behind this, then the most risky piece of the puzzle is mitigated.
yep,
So using crowdfunding as a core component, not as an add-on or a second, or a second idea, but this is a core component of our strategy. Boy, I believe in it. I think that that's so important.
hmm yeah. Indie games really, I guess, the whole purpose of crowdfunding is to get around the investor and to make the end user the investor. And the
Yeah.
end user doesn't need to get a percentage; they just need to get the best version of the product, and maybe at a slight discount or something. But they are, I had, 2,700 investors that jumped in on the Deliverance project, 2,717, in fact,
Yeah.
investors before we went to post, our pledge manager. And that was how I was able to bring this project to life. And without that, we made $300,000, $314,000. And there's no way that I could have gone to my mom or I could have gone to someone else and say, hey, I need $300,000 for this idea for a board game that, is a Christian board game. And I know there's no Christian game that's ever done really well, but mine
Yeah.
will.
You just got to
That's
trust me, Mom.
Yeah, exactly. Like, please mortgage your house for me. So now it's like, hey, this is proving that it exists, but Kickstarter and GameFound and other projects or other crowdfunding platforms are really that proving ground that show certain projects deserve to exist. And I mean, that's something that gives me the warm and fuzzies, knowing that I have hundreds. I mean, I have thousands of investors. We've almost sold through our 5,000 game print run at this point. We have well under 400 games left. But I have thousands of investors that believe in the project, that are investing in it because they believe in it or because it looks fun.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is a grassroots movement that is going to really fuel everything that we do from this point on. Those people are behind us, and a percentage of those people are going to help us with our next Kickstarter campaign and that kind of thing. But all of them have helped us, right? If they bought one game and never invested in another crowdfunding campaign, they paid me $100 or whatever it was, $90 for, to help my company. And
Yeah.
it does give me the warm and fuzzies.
And ultimately you have this moment where if you can aggregate an audience that otherwise like is a myth, right? Like we don't know if that audience exists. We hope it does. But if you can aggregate it in a place like a crowdfunding, then kind of everything else can sort itself out. Like it will mean something actionable to me if I'm like, okay, I could only get whatever. I could get 500 people into this Kickstarter. Like that appears to be the addressable audience. Maybe I screwed up, but whatever. Like if that's the addressable audience, I can
Mm-hmm.
plan for that. Or if I can say like, ooh, like, oh my gosh, like I got 50,000 people who are interested. Like this is actionable intelligence. I
Mm-hmm.
can change my budget. I might have to scope my project differently, maybe better or worse. I might think about season two. That is such actionable
Mm-hmm.
information. And I think that's also something that you can use, which I presume that you're well aware, like you can use that to another investor who
Mhm.
who also just needs to de-risk their investment, which I get.
Right.
One of the great crowdfunding success stories of the last couple of years is The Chosen, and how
Mhm.
many people are like, there's got to be a Christian audience, there's got to be a Christian audience, but no one could ever aggregate them. And then
Yep.
all of a sudden, you found this way where everyone could pitch in,
Mhm.
and boy, did that like it proved one, it proved the crowdfunding model. I think beyond, if anyone had questions, like it's like
Yeah.
that was perfect.
Yep.
But also, it was such a good product market fit
Mhm.
um, that now, like, Angel Studios just wasn't a thing until that kind of opened up this whole. It's the products they're making are one thing, but the model they found
Mhm.
is brilliant.
Yep. Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, I just quickly want to go back to this Legolas idea of taking a royalty, or should you take flat payment? I don't know if you know, Chris, but the designer Dan Perry, who created the Star Wars logo, the iconic Star Wars logo, and he also animated the intro sequence of the text going up the screen.
Mhm.
During the creation of the Star Wars, he was asked by Lucas if he would receive a royalty. There's like 0.5% of the film or a flat fee. And he said, no way, I'm taking a flat fee, because he had done 2 gigs before that where he accepted a royalty and the films came to nothing really. And he was sort of underpaid. So he said, I'm only doing the flat fees.
Mhm.
And that was probably the biggest mistake of his life. In the show notes, you include an article where he discusses this. It's a fascinating read, but that's just maybe a warning of kind of taking those decisions. I think finally, we've
Well,
talked about investors.
yeah.
I know that you've worked with a lot of different projects, a lot of different mediums between PC gaming and mobile gaming. I also know that you've done stuff for government agencies. Some might be classified and you might not be able to talk about, but is that a good revenue stream? Is that a good area to go into? I remember talking to someone in Ireland, actually, a local business owner, saying that they were an agency, saying their sort of the kind of most stable income that they could get was through government agencies doing work for the government. Have you had an experience with that, or has that sort of been hidden us?
So my business partner Randy, he has probably a lot better insight into this because his previous company did parts for aerospace. And long story short, there's a lot of work, like there's a lot of administration and accounting, and like government loves paperwork and they require it, but they make it worth your time. And so on the one hand, like it's not for beginners. The burden of accounting can be overwhelming. But if you roll that into your costs, if you're like, okay, I'm gonna build this widget, this game, this thing, and I'm also gonna include extra cost for just freaking reporting, then government contracts can be super lucrative and super steady, which is great. Um, like anything, you don't want to count it more than it's worth, right? Because still, administrations change, and so nothing's a sure thing. But boy, it sure can be. It sure can be good because I think the government mentality is like none of those projects are trying to make their money back. They're trying to create something, and they're motivated. Like, I need to see this done and done well. And in a pretty real way, money's not an object. They're not trying to like squeeze another percentage out of it. They're not trying to make their income plus 10% back. Like their whole motive operation is way more aligned with you than say an investor. And so that can be really, really good. But it's hard. It's very competitive. And it does come with other burdens. So as a way, like if you can make a good project on that and then frankly, like probably get away from it, that would be good. Um, but I think one of the dirty little secrets in the game industry in general is DoD contracts for simulations. They pay really good money, right? So if you've made a strong combat simulator about, oh look, we're fighting a war in Ukraine, and we actually, like we've mapped the actual world. Like, what an interesting opportunity to train soldiers. Like that kind of stuff can actually be really, really lucrative. As a rule, though, it's for big companies. I think there's exceptions, but that would be my experience. Now, Randy's world was there was a timing opportunity where, frankly, when 9/11 happened, all defense stocks just went through the roof, and him and his partners were like, there's never likely to be a better time to get out of this business than right now. And so they sold the company and had a really nice exit, based on basically a rather unfortunate set of circumstances, but they made good money.
Interesting. And you probably need some security clearance to work on those types of projects, I imagine.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. So that can become an issue.
Lot of paperwork.
A lot of paperwork and background checks, and sometimes they're going to key on things that seem stupid, right? Like, oh, you smoked a joint when you were a 16-year-old, you're done, right? Like the rules are different and they change, and you got to be careful about that. But security clearance is often a thing, yeah.
Well, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you and prying your mind open for this short time. Where can people find you? What's the current project that you're currently working on and that you want to kind of push people towards?
Yeah, so at this moment, go check out legendsofredwall.com. We've got a bunch, several different Redwall games that are alive, and we think that you're going to love them, including the brand new one, Feast and Friends, which is a cozy cooking game. If you want to look a little bit farther, which is the project we're working on you guys with, is wisdomoftherain.com. And that's our upcoming cyber noir detective interactive fiction, which I'm super excited about. But that's probably another several months away.
Mm-hmm. And if people, let's say someone's listening to this, they've had a super successful Kickstarter and they want to turn their board game into a video game, are you the type of people they should reach out to?
We love to do that kind of stuff. So we love to do work for hire. That's always been in our DNA. So absolutely, we're available.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
And they can get you at somagames.com.
Yes, sir. Somagames.com.
And we'll include links in the show notes for you guys.
Heck yeah. All right. Well, on behalf of all the nerds listening, I appreciate you, Chris. And thank you so much for that wisdom. We went a little bit longer, but man, I felt every second was worth it. So
thanks, Andrew. It's super glad to be here.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to have Robot Richard send us on out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.